If you have the courage, please stay on for my briefing, and then Brendan. Just to stay on the subject at hand, I just want to flag the next Tuesday on the 20th, the Secretary General will send a video message to a ministerial conference on the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Central Sahel, a region that includes Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. The conference will be hosted by our humanitarian colleagues, along with Denmark, Germany, and the European Union, and aims to raise money for humanitarian action and to encourage both donor countries and countries of the region to come up with policy commitments to build resilience and stave off future humanitarian needs. Our colleagues warn that people living in the border region between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are now the epicenter of conflict, poverty, and climate change. More than 13 million people need humanitarian assistance. 1.5 are internally displaced, a 20-fold increase over the last 2 years. Lockdowns and the pandemic prevention measures have pushed an additional 6 million into extreme poverty. The UN will be represented at the virtual meeting by the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock, and Denmark's Minister of Development and Cooperation. The European Union's Commissioner for Crisis Management will also hold a webcast press conference. And as you heard, today is World Food Day. The year's theme is growth, grow, nourish, sustain together. Our actions are our future. In a message to mark the day, the Secretary General says the award of this year's Nobel Prize for Peace to the UN World Food Programme recognizes the right of all people to food and our common quest to achieve zero hunger. He stresses that in a word of plenty, there is a grave affront that hundreds of millions go to bed hungry each night. And according to a study released by the World Food Programme today, a basic meal is far beyond the reach of millions of people in 2020 as the pandemic joins conflict, climate change, and economic troubles in pushing up levels of hunger around the world. WFP's Cost of a Plate Food 2020 report highlights the countries where simple meals such as rice and beans cost the most when compared to people's income. South Sudan is once again at the top of the list, with basic ingredients costing a staggering 186% of people's daily income. If a resident of New York State had to pay the same proportion for their salary for a basic meal, the meal would cost $393. 17 of the top 20 countries featured in the index are sub-Saharan African countries, and the report notes that conflict is a central driver for hunger in many, many countries. And an update on the situation in the Kyrgyz Republic, as I've been asked by a number of you. As we said yesterday, we took note of the transfer of presidential powers to Prime Minister Japarov following the president's resignation. We've also taken note of Mr. Japarov's announcement before Parliament today regarding the convening of presidential elections. In this context, we welcome all efforts to bring the country back to the path of stability within the constitutional legal framework. We reiterate our call on all Kyrgyzstani political actors to ensure that decisions on the way forward in the Kyrgyz Republic are being made in an inclusive and transparent manner. The United Nations is committed to provide all necessary support in that regard. As you know, Natalia German, our special representative for Central Asia, is in Bishkek, and she met today with a range of local and international partners to discuss the current situation and UN engagement going forward. She will continue her dialogue with Kyrgyz authorities, the main political parties, civil society, women, youth groups, and all in the coming days. And we'll try to update you on her activities. Yesterday, I think one of you asked a question about the Al-Hol camp, and our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that they are very concerned about the plight of more than 64,000 people living in challenging humanitarian conditions in the Al-Hol camp in the northeast. That's particularly women and children, who make up about 94% of the camp's population. There are around 34,000 children under the age of 12 in Al-Hol. More than 120 of them are unaccompanied or separated from their families and living in an interim care center at the camp. Conditions are difficult at the camp by any measure. In the past month, humanitarians have expressed alarm at the deteriorating security situation following a rise in violent incidents. In addition, 4 cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed so far. Testing is relatively limited, and a wider outbreak remains a significant risk. We, along with our humanitarian partners, are providing comprehensive assistance to the camp. We stress that this cannot be a substitute for a durable solution for all the residents. In the past 2 months, more than 1,000 people are reported to have left the camp. There have also been reports of plans by local authorities to expedite and increase departures of displaced Syrian families in the coming months. Any departure must be voluntary, it must be safe and fully informed and dignified, and in the best interest of the children. You saw that early this morning we issued a statement on Mali, where the Secretary General strongly condemned the 2 attacks perpetrated against a UN mission yesterday, in which an explosive device hit a mission vehicle, killing 1 Egyptian peacekeeper and seriously injuring another. In Timbuktu, indirect fire against the mission's integrated camp resulted in the wounding of at least 1 peacekeeper from Burkina Faso. The Secretary General expresses his deepest condolences to the people and government of Egypt and Mali, and that full statement is available on email. And turning to Lebanon, the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Jan Kubish, said today, on the first anniversary of the start of the popular protest in the country, that protesters have planted the seeds for systematic change and their struggle continues. He paid tribute to the people of Lebanon and remembered the martyrs and injured among the protesters and the security forces. He added that their legitimate grievances and the needs have gone unheeded. Mr. Kubish underscored the UN's full support for the right to peaceful protest as part of freedom of assembly and of expression that must be protected, allowing people to fully exercise these rights within the rule of law. He said the UN will continue to stand closely by Lebanon and its people in their pursuit of a just, dignified, prosperous, stable, and peaceful future. And a quick note from our peacekeeping colleagues in Lebanon, who are continuing to implement their mandate and support national and local efforts in combating COVID-19 in order to improve the food security situation in host communities. UN peacekeepers launched a campaign this week in partnership with the Red Cross and community volunteers to distribute over 30 tons of food packages over the coming weeks in 5 villages. And in addition, UNIFIL recently provided food processing equipment to an organization working towards women empowerment in one of the southern villages. And from Libya, our colleagues of the mission there welcomed the arrest earlier this week of Abdelrahman Milad, commonly known as Al-Bija. He was arrested by law enforcement agencies and of the Government of National Accord. He's been on the Security Council's Sanctions Committee list since June of 2018 for his involvement in human trafficking and fuel smuggling. The mission stresses the imperative for a fair, transparent, and speedy trial for Mr. Milad and all individuals currently held in pre-trial detention. We're committed to continue our partnership with Libyan competent authorities to ensure due process and the supremacy of the rule of law. A couple of more quick notes. Our colleagues at the UN Migration Agency and the African Union have launched their first ever report on African migration, found that migration in the 21st century takes place mainly by land and not by sea, and that Africans' migrants' destinations are overwhelmingly to each other's countries and not to Europe or North America. We often hear stories of desperate Africans on rickety boats trying to cross the Mediterranean to Europe or embarking on perilous trek to the Gulf states. Most Africans, however, are moving across land borders, not across ocean borders. And I want to flag that tomorrow is the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. In a message for the day, the Secretary General says the COVID-19 pandemic is a double crisis for the world's poorest. First, they have the highest risks of exposures to the virus and the least access to quality health care. And second, estimates show that the pandemic could push 115 million people into poverty this year, the first increase in decades. And the Secretary General will take part in a virtual event tomorrow hosted by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs and the NGO International Movement ATD Fourth World, with the support of the Permanent Mission of Burkina Faso and France. You can watch it online. 1:30, there'll be a virtual briefing by Fionnuala Ní Elan, the Special Rapporteur on the promotion of protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. And lastly, we say thank you to 2 countries, Mozambique and Tanzania. Both of them have paid their regular budget dues in full for this year, taking us up to 128. James Bays.
Yes, can I ask you about Nagorno-Karabakh? My understanding from a number of diplomats is that it was one of the main discussions at the Secretary-General's lunch with the Security Council, and that there were discussions about what to do going forward once perhaps there was a more durable ceasefire. And those discussions involved the possibility of UN peacekeeping, UN monitoring, or the Security Council backing a regional organisation. Can you tell us about the contingency plans that seem to be underway for a UN presence there?
Look, I have, excuse me, 2 seconds, because I had an actual note here, and I apologize. This too much stuff going on. Sorry. I can't go into any details in the way of contingency planning that may or may not be going on. What I can tell you is that obviously the Secretary General remains very concerned about the ongoing hostilities, especially its impact on civilian populations. We're very troubled by the continuing suffering of the civilian population. It bears the need to reiterate the strong condemnation of any targeting or attacks on civilians or civilian infrastructure. The Secretary General has continued his personal engagement on this issue. He spoke yesterday with the Foreign Minister of Armenia. Today he scheduled at some point, it could be very soon, but this afternoon with the Foreign Minister of Azerbaijan. His message to both sides is clear: crucial that they implement and fully uphold the ceasefire that they agreed to as a matter of priority for humanitarian purposes. He also stresses that the UN stands ready to assist on humanitarian needs if requested, and if conditions allow, to prepare to work with all sides concerned accordingly. I think this conflict is a dynamic one. It's very important that both sides move towards de-escalation very quickly, because there's obviously risk of widening of the conflict, further destabilization of the region, and the focus for us politically remains on the parties to return to negotiations under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs.
You said that the UN stands ready to help with any humanitarian assistance. Does the UN stand ready, without going into detail, to help with any security mechanisms if there's a ceasefire?
Let me give you a generic answer. The UN is always standing ready. Okay. And Wave, if you have a question. Otherwise, hold on. Let me look in the chat. I'm highly technologically unprepared today. Alan Bulcati, please.
Thank you, Stéphane. I have a question regarding New START treaty. The UN several times urged Russia and the United States to extend it to maximum term for 5 years. Today, Russian President Putin proposed to extend it at least for 1 year, just to gain the time to arrange further agreements. Can you comment somehow on this topic?
The discussions are ongoing, and so I don't want to comment on whatever position each side may have. You know, for the Secretary General, the extension of the New START treaty should remain a priority, and we very much hope that the parties, the Russian Federation and the United States, will agree on a path forward. It's not for us to give the details, but we cannot underscore enough the need for that treaty to be extended. Okay, unless there are other questions, there are not. Sorry, James, and then we'll give the podium to Brendan.
Do you have any update on the situation in Thailand, state of emergency there, protests continue?
Yes. What I can tell you is that we've been monitoring the situation closely. In fact, on the ground, our colleagues from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights have been observing the protests, routinely engaging with the authorities. So we're keeping it, not just a close eye from New York, but on the ground. And to restate what we've said many times from many places of the world, people have a right to demonstrate freely. They should be allowed to exercise that right to demonstrate freely and peacefully. Okay, Brendan. Oh, sorry, Carla. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I think it was this director of NATO, Rasmussen, is it, has invited Georgia to join NATO. Do you have anything further on that?
The head of NATO may be a Secretary General, but he's not mine, so I cannot speak for him. Stoltenberg.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.